Welcome, Trevor, to Metallarium Pages. It's a great pleasure to talk with you about Unearth, this new album, The Wretched and the Ruinous, and more things related to the metal. Well, we're starting with a common question. So, how has the band been during these 5 years? Because you released your last album, Extinctions, in 2019. Now you are releasing a new album. So, how is the things going during these 5 years?
It's a challenge for everyone because of the pandemic. So our last album cycle got cut in half due to the pandemic. We had toured on it for about 14 months. Usually we put in about 20 to 24 months for an album cycle. So we had to just kind of stop supporting the record on the road, like all bands that had records out at that time. We then just kind of focused on family for about 8 to 10 months during the pandemic. And then we started to focus on writing the record and took about a year to do that, and got to the studio. And then we had some delays in the studio. We had some personal issues with certain members. So we had some trying times, but we got through it. And the record is due to be released May 5th. And we have a touring lineup, 2 new guys in the band that have been killing it since July of this past year with us. So the band is in a better place than it's been in a long time.
Okay, how can we expect in terms of new sound compared to the previous album in this new one, The Wretched and the Ruinous, in the career of the Unearth?
Every record you can tell it sounds like Unearth, but this one I think is the most different sounding album that we've ever put out. Buzz is usually the chief songwriter, riff writer, and we all kind of give our 2 cents on the structure, and I always write the lyrics and vocal patterns. Buzz didn't allow himself to go to rely on his normal tricks, his comfort zone, and he forced himself this time because we had a lot of time. He spent 8 to 10 hours a day, many days a week during the pandemic to just write the record. And so he forced himself outside of his comfort zone, which created different sounding songs, which then gave me a different platform to sing. So it wasn't going to be the standard, Trevor Phipps performance. I had different ideas, different things. So the music was different. So there's a lot more dynamic vocally. I also worked on that during the pandemic. I put up a wall in my attic. It's a little makeshift studio. I've been trying to improve my vocal performance for years, and I really think I hit a different place on this record. There's a lot more flavors vocally, and I do that's both me working on it and also the fact that Buzz put in a lot of different sounds in this record.
Okay, so usually the band thinks that the last album are the best efforts to date, but usually a counterproductive thing is that the fans think that differently. The fans think that the first 2 albums or the second or third album are the best works to date. So, as you are a fan of the musician, you think perhaps like that because you are a fan of the musician, you have your influence from the old bands, and you think that the first albums are the best work to date from your influence. So, what is your opinion about this aspect that the band says that is the last album is the best effort to date, but at the same time the fans thinks differently, and they are supporting mainly the first 2 or the first 3 albums of the band?
Yeah, of course. I mean, everyone will romanticize the first time they heard you. So because we're so deep in our career, we hear some people say, oh, your best record ever is The March, which was our 4th record. Or they might say that our best record ever is Darkness in the Light, which is our 5th record, because that was their time that they got introduced to us. The bulk of our fans really prefer The Oncoming Storm. That was a record that broke us. That's when most people that like metal and hardcore heard of Unearth. So people will look at that record like, that's your best one. Bands always think their latest record is the best one because the creative process, you get so emotionally invested in the writing, in the creating and the recording of the album. And it's not just the music, it's the lyrics, it's the music, it's the artwork, it's the whole setup that you get emotionally invested in it. So you're going to think that is your best record, of course. And I've always said, this is our best one, but time will tell. And usually time does tell. It does give the order of which one is the best. This record, of course, we all feel it's our best one. But what I will say is that it is our most dynamic record. And that is by intention. So if we can offer more flavors for people to digest in the metal and hardcore world of what Unearth brings to the table, then hopefully this one will speak to them.
Bueno, talking about a little bit about the history of the band. When, bueno, especially as I said in the first question, talking about in general, when a metal came, when a metalcore came out at the end of the 90s with many bands, well, Unearth, That's Like Dying, Killswitch, and a lot of bands more than the first wave of the metalcore scene around the world. So now, with more than 20 years, do you think the metalcore is more like mainstream style, or perhaps it's more like an underground style? Because sometimes many people, because this style is more focused in US and not related to the other countries.
Yeah, the whole subgenre conversation is a funny one to me, because remember around the year 2007 to 2008, the term metalcore started to become a bad word. So if you were dubbed metalcore, then people just wouldn't give you a chance. But that's what was being said. But what was actually happening was the bands that were actually metalcore, like Parkway Drive, The Acacia Strain, and August Burns Red, these are all straight metalcore bands, started to get massive. So I just think that people like to have a conversation, like to pinpoint stuff. Like right now, certain people think deathcore is a bad word, because if something is overdone, then people say that's bad. But what's really happening is, yeah, there might be some bands that are copycats that aren't original that you turn your back to, but the bands that do the sound well usually end up being the leaders. And so look at Parkway Drive, one of the biggest heavy bands in the world, and they're metalcore. August Burns Red is killing it worldwide. They're metalcore. As Lay Dying is metalcore. These bands are metalcore, so they're all worldwide bands. We tour the world and we play with tons of metalcore bands. So I just think that we should pay less attention to actual subgenre titles and say, oh, do I like that band? Because you can call Unearth a metalcore band. We were one of the first bands to do this sound, but not all of our songs can be dubbed metalcore. If you listen to our song Mother Betrayal on our new record, that's a pure metal song. We have plenty of pure metal songs. We have songs that are more hardcore leaning. And plus, the whole term metalcore is convoluted as well, because there's so many bands now that are out that it's pup metal, but they call it metalcore. I don't know where that got lost in translation. It's metal and hardcore. Where's the pup? You know what I mean? Why are these big puppy choruses and like ultra melodic songs singing about, love? That's not metal or hardcore. So it's I think the term just got confused, and I just like good music, man. I mean, we write metallic hardcore songs, we write metal songs, so we just enjoy what we do.
Okay, and to this aspect, do you think, when I read a lot of opinions about the reviewers about the metalcore or the deathcore in general, on metalcore, we focus on metalcore that you play. Sorry. Usually, the reviewers, fans, and a lot of people talks about the metalcore is a response of the melodic death metal scenes from Swedish. Do you think this aspect is correct, or perhaps do you think is the metalcore have their own foundation and their own way to existence? It's not like a response of the melodic death metal from Swedish.
The bands that came out in the late 90s, bands like us and Killswitch Engage, especially Darkest Hour, very heavily influenced by bands like At the Gates and Flames. These bands definitely worked their way into our influence, but we also grew up with thrash metal, the big four, bands like Testament and Exodus as well. And then we all found hardcore. So what happened was, in the early 90s, we were all 12 and 13 years old at the time. Metalheads love thrash. All of our heroes, they're on major labels, bands like Megadeth, Metallica, Anthrax, even Testament did it. They all started to write more commercial music. That was the push back then. Once Metallica wrote the Black Album, labels saw it, bands saw it, managers saw it, like, oh man, there's money in those hills. Let's write more commercial metal. As a 12 and 13-year-old kid, you get pissed off by this because you want to hear the heavier stuff. That's why Pantera shot up to the biggest band in the world in the mid-90s, because they just got heavier. It's because all these, young, angry teenagers were like, fuck these bands, man, they sold out. I understand why the bands did it. And, bands like Testament had a retort after and got even heavier. They wrote Demonic 2 records later, and it was the heaviest shit they've ever done. So it was a response to it. That was the time the bands did that, but that's where these bands, that's why the bands that came out in the late 90s, we got thrown into the underground. We found hardcore. So we want like, let's find something that's heavy and uncompromising. And at the time, you had bands like Earth Crisis, Snapcase. You had your whole local scene. So up in Boston, we had a band called Sam Black Church. Amazing hardcore band that was metal influenced. So these are actually early metalcore bands that were dubbed hardcore. But you can listen to Earth Crisis, and it's heavy hardcore, but it's also metallic at the same time. So that's really where those bands mixed with thrash. Then when we found bands like At the Gates and In Flames, all that put into a blender, as we're in our late teens now, all of a sudden this fresh sound is out there because we wore all of our influence on our sleeves and put it in a blender, and it comes out sounding unique.
Okay, well, you talk about the big four of the thrash metal, Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, etc., etc. So, but in your opinion, what are the big four from the metalcore scene in US?
Big four of the metalcore. We were at the forefront. Killswitch Engage is at the forefront. Even though Lamb of God isn't considered a metalcore band per se, they were in the beginning with us. We did shows together. We played hardcore shows. We were basically metal bands playing hardcore shows. So we were all the first ones. Shadows Fall. So these to me are the big four, the ones that started it. You can argue Darkest Hour as well, but they weren't. We didn't really get introduced to Darkest Hour till around 2002, but we started in '98. So really, there's a big five. You have to include Darkest Hour because they started this about the same time as us, Lamb of God, Killswitch, and Shadows Fall. And then a bunch of bands came right after. You had bands like As I Lay Dying that were doing really well back then. All That Remains was basically a pure death metal band, but then they really started to cross over into the death metal meets hardcore realm. And then early deathcore bands, a band from Massachusetts, a band called the Red Chord. They were early days deathcore because they mixed death metal with hardcore, and it was great. And grind. There's grind in there.
Okay, talking about returning to the album, to the Disney Wretched and Reunions. Well, we are living in a world that returning in time they promoted the music just by single, and this generation, well, select just 2 or 3 songs from an album. So in this aspect, for you, which songs capture whole essence from this The Wretched and the Reunions in a generation to put these kind of things into the playlist?
You're right. People do focus on singles, so we are going to do more singles than ever on this record. And to be honest, man, we had a really hard time picking singles because we feel like every song's record is a potential single. Because it took so long to write. We wrote 16 songs. We cut it down to 11 songs. It's basically 10 full songs and one is an instrumental. So it's basically 10 singles. And so we're going to do a lot of singles from this record, and that's how you keep up your streams online, because people focus less on album sales now, and they focus more on how many songs you're streaming that month, and that's how you get bigger tours. That's how things work. So it's we have, I think, 4 or 5, maybe even 6 singles that we're doing for this record.
Okay. Well, in talking about the promotion aspect, what are the future plans that the band has for this new album? Perhaps you will do a European tour and a North American tour, but you will scale. I saw that you will scale up a North American tour, but perhaps you will have more dates upcoming. Perhaps you more videos upcoming, and who knows? You will came to Latin America in a full tour.
We would love to. So we actually just played Mexico in November, and we were talking to the promoter about doing a full Latin American tour. He wants to bring us back to Mexico, then do Central America and South America as well. We've only been to South America once. We were in Chile and Brazil back in 2008. We loved it. We've been trying to come back ever since. We had a couple opportunities that fell through, so we really want to come back there and do a full extensive tour. We leave in 8 days for a 3-week European tour. We're home for 10 days. Then we're gone for a month for a North American tour. Then we're home for 10 days. Then we go back to Europe for 3 weeks. So our spring and early summer are already really filled up. But starting mid-July and onward, we are looking for tours, and hopefully a full Latin American tour is in the cards for us.
Okay. Well, But as you told that you did a tour last year in Mexico because the media Metalerium is from Peru and Mexico. So what are for you? What are the some how was the experience to play jazz in Mexico the last times? Any anecdote, etc., etc.
It was great, man. That was our third time in Mexico. First time was 07, then again in 2019, and then again, this 3 or 4 months ago. We were treated very well. The shows were killer, especially in Mexico City. The energy was sky high. The shows were last minute. We got offered a tattoo festival. So next time I'd like more planning so we can arrange more sightseeing and explore the country more, and your city a bit more, and get more promo behind the gigs. But it was fun. We had a good time. Promoter was happy, and we plan to come back as soon as possible.
Great. Well, Trevor, the sad times arrive at this interview. I hope you enjoyed this one like me. It was a pleasure to talk with you. The last album is a great one, a strong machine there. So perhaps do you want to add something to your Latin American fans and Metalerium followers?
Yes. Muchas gracias. Thank you for all the support over the years, and we really hope you check out our new record, The Wretched, the Ruinous, when it comes out in May. And we do hope to see you in 2023 or at the latest 2024. We've been trying to come down to Peru and all of Latin America for many years, or come back at least. So we hope to see you all very soon.